There comes a moment in every woman's life when she stops chasing love and starts choosing herself. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but from a place of quiet power. This is not a story about heartbreak. It's a story about rebirth, about realizing that your worth is not defined by who stays, but by what you refuse to tolerate ever again. And once she made that choice, everything began to shift. She stood in front of the mirror, not to fix her makeup, but to face herself. For the first time in months, she really looked at the woman who had been breaking in silence, smiling in crowds, and shrinking in love. He hadn't hit her, he hadn't shouted, but his indifference had carved holes in her soul, and somehow that hurt more. She used to believe that love meant patience, that being the understanding one made her stronger, so she forgave the unanswered texts. She excused the cold silences. She waited while he forgot she existed. But today she felt something different. Not anger, not sadness, a quiet shift, a whisper inside that said, enough. She wasn't crying, she wasn't shouting, she was just done. Because there's a different kind of heartbreak that doesn't leave you sobbing on the floor. It leaves you standing tall, with dry eyes and a steady heart, realizing that you've been loving someone who never showed up for you. She walked to her closet, picked out her favorite dress. Not for a date, not for him, but for herself. The one he once said was too much. But today she wore it like armor. Every time he made her feel like she was too emotional, too needy, too much, he was really saying, I'm not enough for the kind of love you give. And for too long, she believed she had to shrink to be loved, to dim her light to make him comfortable, to be less so he could feel more. But now she understood his discomfort wasn't her problem. Her love wasn't the issue. His capacity to receive it was. She took a deep breath, not because she was nervous, but because she was releasing the weight of all the second chances she had given to someone who never deserved the first. There's something sacred about the moment a woman chooses herself. It doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just a simple moment, like making coffee without thinking about someone else's preferences. She stopped checking her phone every 5 minutes. She stopped rereading old texts, trying to find meaning in empty words. She started returning to herself. She began journaling again, reading books that fed her soul, walking without a destination, just to feel the wind on her skin. The silence that once haunted her started to feel like home, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting. Not for a message, not for closure, not for him. She was present in her own story, the kind of presence that makes the past irrelevant. He noticed her absence long after she was gone. At first, he thought it was just space, that she needed time. But time passed, and she didn't return. No late night messages, no emotional breakdowns, no signs of longing, just stillness. She wasn't trying to make him miss her. She wasn't playing games. She was healing. And healing doesn't look like revenge. It looks like freedom. It looks like waking up without a lump in your throat. It looks like remembering who you were before they convinced you to doubt yourself. He started to scroll through old photos, laughed at old memories. But his smile faded, because the woman in those pictures wasn't coming back. She had evolved into someone stronger, someone brighter, someone who no longer needed his love to feel complete. Friends started noticing. You look different, they said, and she did. Not because of a makeover or new clothes, but because her spirit had unclenched. She wasn't carrying the weight of being unloved anymore. She had reclaimed her energy, the same energy she used to spend fixing broken connections. Now she spent it building herself. She joined a class she'd always wanted to take, learned something new every week, smiled at her own reflection, not to check flaws, but to say, I see you. The world responded. Doors opened. People treated her with the respect she used to beg for. But most importantly, she no longer sought permission to take up space. She wasn't trying to fit into someone else's life. She was creating her own. There was a time when she would have done anything for his attention. Now, she was too busy paying attention to herself. She wasn't ignoring him out of spite. She just didn't feel the need anymore. His silence didn't echo the way it used to. Her heart didn't jump at every notification. Because healing changes your rhythm. It slows you down. It makes you deliberate. She now chose what and who she allowed into her peace. His mixed signals no longer stirred her. She didn't need to decode his behavior anymore. She simply labeled it inconsistency. And that was enough reason to walk away. She didn't announce her departure. She just left the emotional table where she was no longer being fed. There's a quiet rebellion in no longer explaining yourself. She owed no one an exit speech. Because people know when they're losing something good. They just hope you don't notice it too. But she did, and she left. Her mornings began with gratitude now, not anxiety. No more checking the phone for a message that never came. No more wondering if she said too much or not enough. Instead, she stretched, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you," to the universe, to her past self, to the pain that pushed her here. Because every heartbreak was a redirection, and every tear was a lesson. She wasn't bitter. She was better. She didn't deny that she had loved him deeply. She just finally realized that deep love should never leave you feeling hollow. He had taught her one thing, what love shouldn't feel like. And that was enough. She no longer chased after closure because she learned closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you decide. And she had decided she deserved peace. She began rewriting her story, page by page. The chapter called Sacrifice was behind her. Now she was in the chapter called Self-Respect. She didn't need someone to complete her. She was already whole. She had just forgotten it in the noise of needing to be chosen. Now she chose herself every time. She made choices that aligned with her peace, with her growth, with her joy. He used to say she was too intense. But intensity was never the problem. Lack of depth was. She didn't want half-hearted love anymore. She wanted real. And real love never makes you question your worth. So she stopped shrinking. She stopped accommodating discomfort. She stopped apologizing for expecting effort. Because she wasn't difficult. She was just done settling for less. One afternoon, she passed by the cafe they used to visit. The memories came, but they no longer hurt. Not because they were erased, but because she had grown past them. That cafe had once seen her tears. Now it saw her smile. She walked in, ordered her coffee, and sat alone, content. She used to hate being alone. Now she cherished it. Alone meant peace. Alone meant clarity. Alone meant choosing herself without compromise. The world hadn't changed, but she had. Her silence was no longer a wound. It was wisdom. She didn't speak of him anymore, not out of pain, but because he no longer lived in her thoughts. She wasn't just surviving. She was living. And in her own presence, she found everything she was once searching for in him. He reached out, not with an apology, not with accountability, just a casual, "Hey." But she didn't respond, because she had learned. Some people miss you, not because they love you, but because they miss the version of themselves they were when you loved them. He didn't miss her. He missed the comfort, the effort, the woman who showed up even when he didn't. But that woman no longer existed. She had outgrown the version of herself that tolerated being ignored, disrespected, and misunderstood. His message no longer sparked curiosity. It confirmed everything she already knew. He only remembered her when he felt her absence. But she had no interest in being remembered. She was too busy becoming unforgettable. She no longer saw love as sacrifice. She saw it as alignment. If it cost her peace, it was too expensive. If it made her question herself, it wasn't love. It was confusion dressed up as romance. In the past, she would have accepted crumbs, thinking it was a feast. Now she saw clearly. She was not asking for too much. She had simply been asking the wrong person. Love shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells. It shouldn't make you shrink to fit into someone else's comfort zone. Love should feel like sunlight, steady, warm, and effortless. So she set new standards, not for others, but for herself. She promised herself to never explain her worth again, to never settle again, to never mistake attention for affection. And in doing so, she became the kind of woman she once admired: peaceful, powerful, unapologetically whole. People began asking her, "How did you do it? How did you let go?" She smiled and said, "I didn't let go all at once. I let go every time I chose myself. Every time she stayed silent instead of reacting. Every time she walked away from chaos. Every time she forgave herself for staying too long." Healing wasn't loud. It was in the little things. It was in leaving his texts on read. It was in saying no without guilt. It was in dancing alone in her kitchen with no one to impress. She didn't need closure from him. She became her own closure. She didn't need an apology. She made peace with not receiving one. And most of all, she realized sometimes the apology you need is the one you give yourself for doubting your own worth, for staying silent when you wanted to scream, for thinking his love was the best you'd ever get. She had stopped romanticizing potential, because potential doesn't love you, actions do. He had potential to be better, to love her right, to grow up. But potential without effort is just a dream you keep having until it becomes a nightmare. She had spent nights imagining what he could be instead of seeing what he was. And what he was inconsistent, unavailable, comfortable in giving her the bare minimum. She deserved more than half effort. She deserved presence, not promises. She deserved a love that showed up every day without needing to be begged. And once she saw that clearly, the illusion shattered. She stopped waiting for change. She stopped believing his someday. Because real love doesn't come someday. It shows up now, in the everyday moments. Her growth became louder than his absence. She didn't block him out of anger. She simply cleared space for better energy. She unfollowed his life, not because she was bitter, but because she no longer needed updates on someone who didn't fight to stay. Healing isn't revenge. It's redirection. She started putting her time where it mattered, in learning, in creating, in building the version of herself that didn't depend on someone else's presence for happiness. She no longer cried over what ended. She celebrated what began, a new chapter without fear, without guilt, without dragging the weight of the past. Because when you stop mourning what didn't work, you make space for what will. And in that space, she found herself again. One day, she stood at her window, sipping tea, watching the rain. The same rain that once made her feel lonely now felt poetic. She no longer viewed solitude as emptiness. She saw it as sacred, a place where she met her truest self, without masks, without noise, without seeking validation. The world outside kept spinning. People came and went, but she was grounded, anchored in her own worth. The storm that once shook her had passed, not because it stopped raining, but because she learned how to dance in it. He might still remember her, but she no longer remembered herself through his eyes. She had rewritten her identity, not as a woman who was left, but as a woman who rose. There was a moment last week. I caught myself reaching for my phone, half expecting a message from him. Not because I missed him, but because part of me still remembered how it used to feel, to be wanted, even if only halfway. I stared at the screen, empty notifications, and then I smiled, not out of sadness, but because I didn't feel that old ache anymore. I remembered how I used to beg the universe for one more chance, one more sign, one more effort from him, but not anymore. Now, I beg for peace, and peace never comes from people who ignore your worth. I gently put my phone down and whispered to myself, I'm not waiting anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Starting over felt foreign at first. Waking up without checking if he'd texted. Cooking meals just for me. Sleeping without wondering where he was. But slowly, it started to feel like home. I began decorating my space differently, putting up pictures that made me smile, lighting candles not to set a mood for someone else, but because I deserved warmth. I took long walks with no destination. Sometimes I cried. Other times, I laughed at how free I felt. It wasn't the absence of him that healed me. It was the presence of me, fully, deeply, finally. And somewhere between quiet mornings and solo coffee dates, I realized I wasn't rebuilding to get back to who I was before him. I was becoming someone new. Someone stronger, someone softer, but not fragile. There was this evening, I ran into someone who used to know both of us. They looked at me and said, "You seem lighter." And they were right, not because life had magically become easier, but because I had stopped carrying weight that was never mine to hold. I used to carry his moods, his silence, his confusion, like it was my responsibility to fix what he wouldn't even admit was broken. But healing taught me a secret. I was never hard to love. He was just not ready to love someone whole. So I stopped dimming my light, stopped editing myself, stopped walking on eggshells. I now walk barefoot, grounded, soft, but fiercely aligned with who I am. And no, I didn't say any of this out loud. I just smiled and let them see the glow I built without him. I went through our old photos the other night, not to cry, but to let go. I looked at the girl in those pictures. She was glowing, yes, but there was a sadness in her eyes even she didn't notice back then. She smiled wide, but her shoulders were tired. She loved deeply, but she begged quietly for time, for effort, for presence. I wanted to reach into the picture and hug her. Tell her, you don't have to work so hard to be loved. But I know now she had to go through all of it, so I could become me. I closed the album, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because sometimes you have to meet the wrong love to find the right version of yourself. This morning, I looked at myself in the mirror, not to fix anything, but to admire the woman I've become. No makeup, hair messy, eyes a little tired, but oh, so alive. I traced my own reflection and said softly, "I'm proud of you." Because no one saw the battles I fought in silence. No one knew the nights I cried on the bathroom floor, promising myself I'd never beg again. And I didn't. I picked myself up. I learned to sleep with silence, to laugh without waiting for someone to get the joke, to live, not in reaction to someone else's presence, but in celebration of my own. This isn't revenge. This isn't survival. This is rebirth, and I've never felt more like me. Part 21 yesterday, someone asked me if I was open to love again. I paused, not because I'm afraid to love, but because I've learned the difference between being loved and being chosen daily. Love, to me, isn't flowers once a month or sweet words in passing. It's presence, it's effort, it's consistency. So I told them, I'll open my heart again, but only to someone who meets me where I already am, not someone I have to carry to get there. Because I'm no longer building bridges for people who won't cross oceans for me. I'm not watering one-sided gardens. I've learned that being alone is peaceful, and peace is a high standard. So unless love feels like clarity, not confusion, I'd rather keep dancing with my own soul. There was a time I thought silence meant punishment. Now I see it as power. I no longer explain myself to people who never cared to understand me in the first place. I no longer defend my boundaries to those who only showed up to push them. I don't respond to guilt trips, late-night apologies, or just checking in messages. Because healing taught me that closure doesn't always come with conversations. Sometimes it comes with distance, with deciding that your peace matters more than their confusion. And maybe they still wonder why I never replied. But I don't owe anyone the version of me who begged to be heard. I've outgrown the need to be understood by people who never truly saw me. Now I save my energy for spaces where I'm celebrated, not just tolerated. Last week, I visited a place I hadn't seen in years, the bookstore we used to go to. I stood at the doorway for a second, expecting to feel the sting of old memories, but it never came. Instead, I walked in, browsed shelves, bought a book I'd been meaning to read for months. For me, I sat by the window, sipped coffee, and flipped through pages. And in that moment, I felt so complete. Not because someone held my hand, not because anyone texted, but because I was holding space for myself. There was a time I avoided places tied to him. Now I reclaim them. Because nothing and no one gets to own the joy I build within myself. You know what healing really looks like? It's not always pretty. It's messy nights and swollen eyes. It's waking up still thinking of them and choosing yourself anyway. It's the decision to unfollow, not out of hate, but because you deserve peace when you scroll. It's setting your phone on, do not disturb, Because you are not on call for anyone's convenience anymore. It's rewriting the way you speak to yourself. No more, I'm too much. Now it's, I am enough, just not for the wrong ones. It's learning to trust again. Not others, but your own intuition, your gut, your energy when it tells you this isn't safe. And maybe I'm not fully healed yet, but every day I choose me, and that is enough. Today, I laughed without flinching. No one asked me to quiet down. No one rolled their eyes. I took up space, boldly, softly, proudly. I no longer whisper my dreams. I speak them into rooms that echo them back. The love I used to pour into others, I now pour into my routines, into my morning sunlight, into my body when I stretch, into my soul when I rest. And maybe he still thinks I'll return one day. But he doesn't know I didn't leave to teach him a lesson. I left to learn mine. And the lesson was simple. You don't have to stay where you're shrinking, just to prove you're worthy of being seen. I've seen myself now, and I promise I'll never go unseen again. I remember the day I stopped needing closure. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no letter, no final text, no apology. It was just a quiet morning. I made my bed, opened the windows, felt the sun on my face, and realized I no longer cared why he left the way he did. Because the truth is, some people don't leave for a reason. They leave because they were never meant to stay. And holding on to the why was holding me back. So I let it go. I let him go. Not because I stopped loving, but because I started loving myself more. And that kind of peace, it doesn't come from answers. It comes from release. I saw him again months later. He looked surprised, like he expected me to still be broken, still aching, still his. But I wasn't. I was glowing, not because of revenge, but because of recovery. He asked how I was, and I said, better. Not to prove a point, but because it was true. I didn't ask if he missed me, didn't ask if he regretted anything. Because I no longer needed his regret to validate my growth. Seeing him reminded me of a version of me that no longer exists. And I left that moment proud. Not that I moved on from him, but that I moved toward me. I used to think healing was about forgetting. Now I know it's about remembering without pain. I remember the girl I was when I first met him, hopeful, trusting, unguarded, and I honor her, but I also protect the woman I've become, wise, calm, self-assured. The journey from her to me wasn't easy. There were nights I doubted everything, days I couldn't recognize my own reflection, but I kept going. Every journal entry, every tear, every boundary I set, they all led me here. And I wouldn't trade this version of me for anything. Not even for the version of us I once dreamed of. These days I wake up with clarity. My mind isn't cluttered with overthinking. My heart isn't tied to someone else's emotional availability. I've learned to trust the flow of life, to understand that endings are not failures. Sometimes they're the beginning of your becoming. I now walk into rooms without needing to be noticed, because I notice myself, and that's enough. My peace isn't negotiable anymore. My standards aren't up for debate. And my love, that deep, loyal, powerful love, is now reserved for those who can hold it, not just reach for it. I no longer fear losing people. I only fear losing myself. And that I will never let happen again. If you're listening to this, let this be your reminder. You don't need to be chosen by someone else to feel complete. You only need to choose yourself, again and again, without apology. You are not hard to love. You just haven't been loved in the way you deserve yet. But that love, it starts with you, with how you speak to yourself, with how you treat your own time, your own body, your own energy. And the day you finally see yourself the way you wanted him to see you, that's the day your healing begins. Because the truth is, you are the love of your own life. And when you know that no one can take your power away again, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more deeply personal, empowering content like this. Your journey matters, and we're here for every step of it.